Before I even start talking about Spider Man Remastered 2018, there are a few things I'd like to point out. One, I'm a DC guy. I always have been. So my fascination is with characters like Batman and Superman, with the Cape Crusader getting what could be considered the greatest trilogy or quadrology, depending on who you talk to in gaming history, not just in the superhero subgenre. Two, I've always had a bad opinion on Spider-Man games, with the bulk of the blame going to Spider-Man 2, the 2004 game kind of based on the movie of the same name. I say kind of because there was only 1,000 things in the game that weren't in the movie. It's not just old but empty and lackluster in so many ways, and that honestly left a bad taste in my mouth, which in turn made me extremely skeptical of the 2018 Marvel game. And the third thing being, even though I'm sort of an MCU fan like every other pop culture geek, I never had any particular liking towards the Spider-Man franchise. Peter Parker's happy-go-lucky, always doing the right thing broke superhero act just isn't my cup of tea. Now why did I say all that, you might be wondering? I just want you all to know my pre-game feelings, so that you don't call this video a fanboy's orgasmic reaction. In fact, I had never even heard of many characters before playing, so even though I'm gonna speak extremely highly of the game, you can rest assured it's a totally unbiased reaction to a genre-defining game. Now that that's out of the way, let's talk about Spider-Man 2018. What a pleasant surprise this was, because as the title read, this is probably the best superhero game like ever. Hold your horses, don't burn the place down just yet. Hear me out first, because I have a lot to say.
And I have nothing better to do.
I always like talking about how the first 60 minutes of a game makes me feel, because for me personally, that's what would keep me around or make me right off. And the first hour of this game has more action and information influx than many games have throughout their entire runs. You name it, they have it. Good intros, significant background info on all the characters, magnificent start sequence, a great boss fight, terrific action, exploration, stealth, humor, stakes, every goddamn thing. I was truly awestruck, and any bad opinions or reservations I had were webbed away. My very first point of attraction was that finally there was a superhero game amidst general public and not just criminals. That was a breath of fresh air. As from over a decade, I've been playing in worlds that have 1,000 baddies and a few cops. It was nice to be around the people you're saving for once. And since I had mixed feelings even before starting the game, I went in expecting a subpar experience. I mean, I had read the reviews beforehand, so I did have some glimmer of hope. But the product I got at the end was absolutely mind-boggling. Now before we go any further, I want you to remember that subjectivity is a thing. So some opinions, which I know might seem ludicrous to many people, are still just that, opinions. I feel there are no right answers in some areas, just a matter of what you like and don't. So please bash me respectfully. Let's get into the meat of the matter now and go over to the visuals. What can I say? It's simply the best. This has to be the most convincing and accurate depiction of New York City in any game. I mean, not many games have New York, but for what it's worth, it's a technical marvel. And if you have the hardware to back up this monstrosity, it'll feel surreal. I said that because I feel this is the only truly high definition game I have ever come across. The texture quality is insane. Appearances of buildings, the sun, the skin, clothes, and even hair, which most games get wrong, are disturbingly close to the real thing. The layout of the map is perfect for web swinging, and it's all neatly segregated into non-confusing sections. I have never seen a more vibrant and lively city than Spider-Man's New York in a game ever before. It proved that you don't need a 500 square kilometer play area to make it interesting. It's only 10 square kilometers, but is as rich and dense as any of its peers, with much greater square footage. I often hate it when maps are cluttered with too much in one location and too little in others, but this game hit the sweet spot. And if you're a New Yorker and have also played Spider-Man, tell me how close it is to the actual city. This is a slightly fictionalized version, however, with 80% real life locations and about 20% places from the Spider-Man or Marvel universe rather. From what I can surmise at least, it's so filled to the brim with info, it's only fair that I expand on each part of the map separately. Let's start at the bottom with the financial district or Wall Street. It's mostly multi-story buildings, and the heart of Wall Street is filled with skyscrapers, that block out the sun and quite literally touch the sky. It's not just the layout or structure of the map itself, but the formation or the makeup of the area is remarkable. The financial district has slightly busier streets, with noticeably increased traffic, and stockbrokers in suits and moneymen walking around the place. It's also organic, it really flies under the radar, but the extreme attention to detail might low-key be the best quality of the entire game. I want you to remember this because it's gonna come up a lot. I will nitpick a bit though, because I absolutely hated the fact that unless you have an RTX graphics card, you'll see minimal or no reflections of Spider-Man on any of the glass buildings. Whether you're running up a skyscraper or casually sticking to a glass panel, Spider-Man is seemingly invisible in the glass, even when you're running the game on a marginally high-end PC. It's not a big deal, I know, but it throws the otherwise mind-blowing visuals slightly off balance. Then there's Chinatown. They have done justice to the real-life location, and although not an exact replica, it's still pretty surreal to run around the in-game version of the place. And as you'd expect, there are more Asian-looking people walking the area. This pattern is repeated all throughout the map. For example, if it's a park, you would most likely see many people in sportswear actually stretching and whatnot. And if it's near the NY University, there'd be more millennial-looking dudes with backpacks and stuff. The places aren't formed only of them, but there's just enough of the crowd associated with the location to bring about authenticity. Speaking of the New York University, the Greenwich area is excellent in its own way. I know that it's all based on real locations, but the legitimate feel the game provides is astonishing. Like the streets in Greenwich are clean, but the back alleys of the aforementioned Chinatown are a bit littered with garbage. This level of attention to detail is unfathomable. Then there's Midtown Manhattan, complete with all the skyscrapers you can imagine and the Empire State Building, of course. It's truly a sight to behold running up this concrete megastructure. It's certainly my favorite location because web swinging here is the most fun, since there's a plethora of vertical advantage here that's not present in most other areas of the map. And all throughout the city, we see rooftop gardens, restaurants, and leisure areas full of people chilling and having a good time. After that comes Hell's Kitchen. Obviously, I mean it literally is New York in the flesh or concrete, but I'm just trying to point out how the developers have made each location unique and distinct by adding small but extremely impactful layers. For example, the crowds. Like, you would often see how crowds with just a couple dozen character designs randomly spread across the map, but not in Spider-Man. And to my surprise, NPCs even call and address each other with names, which is about the last thing you expect in a game. Speaking of the crowds, this has to be one of the most densely populated game cities of all time. The only one that beats Spider-Man 2018 is Assassin's Creed Unity. But here there's decently long stretches of halted traffic, a ton of people on the sidewalks, and although you will see overlapping character designs of random people, it still feels like most of them are different. I think that's because of the clever choice of the color of their clothing. Most people, like in real life, are wearing blue jeans, black suits, and dark colored sweaters and coats, which makes them all seem different despite being more or less the same. And at the edge of Hell's Kitchen lies the massive dock area, which I felt was the most underutilized part of the map. There was barely anything to do there except for a couple of side missions. I know I'm getting extremely nitpicky now, but hey, I gotta call it like I see it. The Upper East Side was just as beautiful, but the biggest surprise for me was the Avengers star bang in the middle, which more or less confirms that the game is in some way, shape or form a part of the MCU. Maybe this is like Earth 989 or something. Who really knows at this point? The Central Park is a thing of beauty. To be honest, I dreaded going there, since I thought swinging wouldn't be possible here and thought I'd have to run around the place. But to my pleasant surprise, Spider-Man can apparently swing around from trees as well. That was a relief. The Upper West Side is just more of the stunning view, but my favorite has to be Harlem. Not only is it gorgeous, it also feels the most authentic. From the Harlem housing projects to the subway line where Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man stopped the train, it's all better than I ever imagined. The whole map is packed with real-life locations with the occasional fictional additions, like the Fisk Tower and the massive Roxxon Corporation building. The texture quality of water is stunning. The way ripples form in the ponds in Central Park, it looks as real as possible. I did not, however, like the plants and trees in the game. They look very artificial and have an awkward outline, which makes them feel faker than my ex-girlfriend. The sun is especially noteworthy because the way it shines and looks while setting in the middle of the day just elevates elevates the atmosphere tenfold. Like, you can tell what part of the day it is just by looking at the sun once. Nights are remarkable too, and shadows are real. I've noticed that more often than not in games, shadows are just there, and going into them makes no difference. But here, shadow is an advantage that you can use while performing stealth takedowns. The Times Square was my favorite place to visit at nights, as it's magnificently lit up with billboards and hoardings that you can see from a mile. The billboards themselves have been given so much attention because it's not just randomly thrown around. It features real people on advertisements and movie motion posters displayed on said billboards, which makes it feel all the more real. Otto Octavius' lab and the Feast Center, two places that Peter often visits during the story of the game, are packed with a myriad of world-building elements and Easter eggs that, if you pay attention to, will answer a ton of questions that you would otherwise not understand. Like, how did Octavius become the man we see? And the history and relationship between him and Norman Osborn. And how was Peter's childhood? His past is given great context at the Feast Center. And the interactions he has with the homeless people in the shelter gives some terrific character development to Peter Parker as a person. Now that I've covered pretty much all the aspects that form the world of Spidey, let's go over to the character designs, and why not start off with the most controversial of the lot, the man himself, Peter Parker, who's played by Ben Jordan in the version that I picked up, but another actor/motion capture artist played the part in the original 2018 game. This apparently received a lot of backlash from the fans, and I can see why. The version of Spider-Man we see in this game is a mature, seasoned crime fighter, but the new character design makes him seem like an 18-year-old. And on top of that, Spidey Jordan has some uncanny resemblance to Tom Holland, who's the current Spider-Man in the MCU. But since I followed Tom's journey as the web slinger from the past 4 or 5 years, I really didn't feel uncomfortable with the change. If anything, I felt like I was in familiar territory, and that made the whole process of getting adjusted really easy. And to anybody who thinks that's a knock on John Bubniak's portrayal of the character, it's not. This is just my personal preference. Spidey has a lean yet powerful build. He isn't Batman levels of muscular, but then again, he doesn't need to be. He even wears different clothes at different points of time in the game. We usually see superheroes have a mask costume and another set of clothes they wear all the time. But that didn't happen here. He doesn't change as often, but then again, he is broke. So a small wardrobe goes perfectly with his character. In addition to his in-game Spider-Man suit, there's 45 other costume variations, including well-known versions like the Iron Spider suit, Tobey Maguire's Spidey outfit, and even the Night Monkey costume from Spider-Man Far From Home. So it pays homage to all versions of Spider-Man in a very subtle way. MJ looks as cute as ever with her headstrong yet kind persona shining through, and a big chunk of the credit goes to the character design. I haven't enjoyed the on-screen portrayal of Mary Jane up until this game. Kirsten Dunst had a disingenuous gold digger vibe in her version of MJ. Sorry guys, that's just my feeling. And Zendaya, as pretty as she is, just doesn't feel like an equal and a partner to Spider-Man. A lot of that has to do with all the childish bickering and banter that has now become a staple of the MCU. But this MJ is simply perfect. I will expand in detail on the character itself later on, but the design team has done a bloody brilliant job, and the casting is seemingly perfect. Alfred Molina has always been the Doc Ock for me, but after seeing the Otto Octavius in this game, it's become my favorite. Casting the perfect person for the role adds tremendous value. It's something that Hollywood casting directors excel at, but now the gaming industry has caught up with A-list Hollywood movies, so that's a big thumbs up. Even Doc Ock's mechanical arms look better, more durable, and more advanced than the ones we saw in Spider-Man 2. Martin Lee, who's the second primary antagonist, has a distinct character design, very memorable, and Silver Sable turned out to be a delight for sore eyes. I mean, look at that woman, hot damn! That has to be the hottest design of a female character along with Catwoman in Arkham City. And it's not just the design, but the aesthetics, the costume, her attitude, and the ever so sexy accent. It's all just spot on. But she's not the only hottie around, because there's also the gorgeous Black Cat, who unfortunately appeared only in the DLC, but trust me my boys when I tell you this, she added an unbelievably big, massive, round bit of value to the DLC. If that ain't perfect, my god. Well, I guess that's enough simping for now. Back to the matter at hand. Norman Osborn and Aunt May, two more principal characters of the universe, also make impactful appearances and look pretty spot on. This Aunt May isn't a bombshell like the MCU version, but she fits the given role really well. There's also a plethora of side villains making an appearance. Wilson Fisk aka the Kingpin, Rhino, Electro, Vulture, Scorpion, Tombstone, Hammerhead, just to name a few. To be honest, I didn't even know the last 3 guys. But after I got through the game, they have been etched into my memory. And they all look formidable. Kingpin is a behemoth. And so is Tombstone and Hammerhead. But Rhino would be my favorite amongst the side villains. He looks outright menacing. Even simple thugs have unique appearances. It's clear they've made a ton of character designs and great ones, might I add. Even for common criminals, policemen, the public, basically NPCs that play a minuscule role. So even teeny tiny aspects got a lot of attention. I will expand on this later on. Until now, my gold standard for a superhero game was Arkham Knight, which had the best of music, combat, stealth, visuals, designs, and arguably the story. So many overwhelming positives. But Spider-Man 2018, much to my chagrin, has outdone Arkham Knight in most departments. The way Spider-Man's world is built is what makes the semi-fictional New York feel authentic and intriguing. It has a multitude of different aspects, the biggest thing being Spidey's interactive nature. If someone talks to him, he talks right back. Doesn't matter if it's cops, bad guys, or general public, who by the way, treat him like a superstar. They acknowledge how meeting him was the best thing and also their dream. He would high-five them, exchange a couple of words, even take a selfie. The whole shebang. It doesn't matter if you're amidst a battle or simply walking by on the street, there's always a transaction of words happening. That made the world 100 times better for me. And our protagonist is also very self-aware, pointing out things like how some battles go on for too long, or subtle hints to the existence of other characters in his universe like Captain America or the Avengers, and giving us some indefinite references to famous movies like Keanu Reeves' Speed. There are some games with totally dead worlds, like Arkham Origins for example. There, thugs would just say a few general dialogues, and it was nothing special or noteworthy. Arkham Knight saw a ton of interactions between the criminal scum of Gotham, but nothing was ever with Batman. But here the world tells you how important Spider-Man is to the city of New York and its people. Of course, most support him, and some condemn his actions, but they all add value. The dialogues of this game are insanely good. Spidey's one-liners were never better. They make me chuckle all the time. They managed to add wit, humor, and layers to Spider-Man's character simultaneously. The silver-tongued Spidey is outdone only by J. Jonah Jameson, who doesn't appear physically but has a radio show that talks about not just Spidey, but all things he does during the course of the game. And I mean all things. If you stop a robbery or a car full of criminals, he will mention it. And these are just side missions. I didn't pay heed to this initially, but when it kept happening more and more often, I went like, damn, thugs beaten up by Spider-Man? That happened like 10 minutes back. This level of attention to detail is unseen. I apologize in advance, but I'm gonna repeat this phrase a lot of times. I can look up for synonyms and say it in different ways, but I'm gonna keep it simple for once. Instances where Spidey's having a donut or a pizza, which are just snippets really, make him feel more of a person than any other superhero in gaming history. And there are some dialogues that are right out of an onlooker's mouth. Like, if I existed in a universe with Spider-Man, these would be some of the things I would love to ask the web-slinger. And the delivery of these dialogues are impeccable too. Yuri Lowenthal has done an incredible job. I was shocked to find out that he's 51 years old, because his voice has all the markings of a man in his 20s. And since the majority of the times his face is covered with the mask, the voice acting holds a lot more significance. Talking of voiceovers, every actor has done a commendable job. MJ first. Laura Bailey, who voices the iconic character, is the best version of Mary Jane I have seen to date. Or heard. She has a sincerity about her. This version of MJ is a reporter in the Daily Bugle instead of Spider-Man working in the media outlet, which was refreshing. Another key player in the happenings is Yuri Watanabe, who is a police captain and also a confidant of Spider-Man, and the back and forth between the two, be the serious kinds or the light-hearted moments, they all make the Spider-Man world feel real, with a rich history. I usually put the traversal and the combat under the same umbrella when talking about gameplay, but here they are both so vast and unique, they require separate focus. So let's start with the traversal. How does Spidey move around? In addition to the classic web swinging, They've added moves like the perch launch where you tap a button as soon as he zips to a ledge and Spidey propels himself into a massive jump. The wall walking or running, you must have guessed what that is. Special moves like passing through pipes and water tank bases, and the swinging itself is massively updated. If you practice enough, you can totally control how high or low you travel, what speed you swing at, how high you jump at the top end of a swing, what direction your swing goes in. It's all in the player's hands. The way the camera follows you around or the speeding effect that shows momentum building while swinging are all terrific little details. You really need to experience the excellence. Because even something as simple as the traversal has so many dimensions and is so much fun, it makes the players want to avoid fast travel entirely. That's pretty rare. Because after a point, getting to a place is just going from point A to point B. Also, when Spidey swings low, people on the street actually freak out and duck, which is exactly what would happen if someone swung right above our head. There are some outstanding traversal challenges that keep you on your Spidey toes and gives you a task just tough enough to make you work hard to accomplish it. More on the challenges themselves later on. And now it's time to talk about what could be one of the greatest combat experiences of my life. You might think I'm exaggerating, but I'm not. And by the time we reach the end of this section, you'll know what I'm talking about. As I mentioned before, I'm an Arkham guy, so I was totally accustomed to the left click attack, right click counter system for a decade. Yes, I'm a PC guy and that old, so don't judge me. But here I was introduced to something entirely new and refreshing. To be honest, it's not as simple as it was in Arkham. I was afraid that it'll be too much like it, but to my surprise it wasn't. There's only about 100 moves you can perform, which can then be divided into a myriad of permutations and combinations to create your own combat style. Aggressive, defensive, gadget heavy, however you decide to play, the game allows you to. Speaking of gadgets, Spider Man has 8. Old school web shooters, a concussion blast, which pushes enemies behind about 10 feet, impact web, a giant splash of web that sticks enemies to the walls and other surfaces, a tiny spider drone, which distracts enemies for a few seconds giving you breathing space, electric web, you know what that is, the suspension matrix, which holds the enemies in a still levitated state for a few seconds, a web bomb, the name speaks for itself, and last but certainly not the least, trip mines, which is a stealth gadget fundamentally. When these 8 tools are combined with other combat moves and each other, you can wipe out enemies faster than my ex wiped my memories from her brain. That's bloody fast. And now to the hand-to-hand part, which is full of flashy spider tricks and seamless combo building, which isn't as quick to disappear as it is in the Arkham games. I'm sorry that I'm constantly dragging Batman in here, but since it's the gold standard and I'm claiming that this is greater, we have to compare. I like combat systems to be fast-paced with heavy emphasis on skill. If a system encourages key bashing or just mindless action, it gets boring real fast. In Spider-Man, the first thing I noticed is the almost terrifying number of enemies. In major locations, which are mostly side missions, there could be 6 waves of 10 to 15 opponents. So that's like 60 to 90 enemies in one single location. And depending on the difficulty level you choose in the beginning, they would be merciful or outright murderous. But in either case, the combat experience is one that will pull you back again and again. And as you upgrade yourself, the enemies do too. It only gets tougher and tougher with each passing level. So action with brains. There's your basic attack, dodge, jump and knockout. But they've taken these 4 variables and created a monstrous formula that's gonna be the benchmark for generations. Just the attack button can unleash about 10 to 14 different moves depending on your positioning, button press duration and combinations. Dodging included the famed Spidey sense into the mix. So the incoming attack indicator goes off over Spider-Man's head when you're about to get punched or shot at. The Spidey moves include swing kicks, attacks off of walls, slide unders, instant takedowns, the zip punch, and the staple aerial combat, which has so many moves that despite playing the game for over 70 hours, I still can't remember them all. There's air yank, air throw, object throw, air thrust, aerial takedowns, plus it has some cool additions which make Spider-Man's no-kill rule seem possible. Like if you're battling a guy on a roof and you push him off, After falling about 20 feet, a web appears, a Spider-Man seemingly attached, to then paste them to the nearest wall. There's also a focus bar, which can be built up with attacks and even gadget usage. And set focus can be used for healing and takedowns. And to elevate the already mind-blowing system to new heights, Spider-Man can add modifications to the suit, like Combo Savior, which protects the combo multiplier even after absorbing a couple of basic attacks, kinetic power cells, which help generate more focus, discharge passes that give you more focus and perfect dodges, just to name a few among the 23 abilities. You can even imbue special pass into the suit like the electric punch, battle focus which generates focus at a super fast rate, and the bulletproof ability, and many more, but these abilities need a recharge after being used. There's also a good number of different types of enemies, regular ones with the baton, sword-wielding demons, thugs armed with a gun or a goddamn bazooka, soldiers with shields and jetpacks and armor, of course. Then there's your brutes with miniguns, a sort of metal whip bearing enemies who might just be the toughest to defeat, and some advanced enemies who can't be webbed up. So the difficulty depends on, I'd say, the clan the henchmen belong to, but I had a couple of complaints. First thing being, perfect battles or combos doesn't have any added rewards, which would have given the players a great incentive to not get hit. And when you give a takedown to an enemy, Spidey makes a lot of fancy moves, but irritatingly enough, the cameras get stuck in a predetermined path, so you have no opportunity to look around to plan your next move or something. I'd like to see this changed in the next game. Also, if you're cornered by too many enemies, you would not have a moment to even breathe. And if it's under a ramp or a tight corner, the camera would be stuck in a weird way where you can't see what's going on, and as a result, you'd get beat down like a bug. Pun intended. The game also has a beautiful stealth system, but it isn't as fully developed as, I'm sorry to say this again, Arkham Knight, but it does have some smoothness and fluidity of its own. You can use your gadgets like the aforementioned trip mine, web shooter, and impact web to distract and even take down enemies. There are also indicators which tell us if the enemy is in the line of sight of other bad guys, so we can determine whether taking them down is safe. Spider-Man also has the second coolest move ever, the perch takedown, in which he webs up enemies like the demon spider Shelob did to Frodo, and the animation is disturbingly similar. He also has moves like instant takedown, ledge hang takedown, and straight up dropping scaffoldings onto enemies. There are some ideas that are similar to Arkham Knight, like Spidey has some kind of VR tech that penetrates walls and shows us where enemies are, the aforementioned methods of knockout, perfect dodging providing added damageability or focus, but the game has a twist of its own on these aspects, commendable to say the least. And this is where I give you the spoiler warning, because this section will contain major spoilers, as I'll be diving down in depth discussing what happens, what I liked and didn't, because the heart and soul of games like this is the story. So unless I break down all aspects and layers of it and dissect the constitution of the plot, I wouldn't be able to justify my argument of this being the greatest superhero game ever made. So if you haven't played the game yet and have plans to, I'd suggest you skip this chapter entirely and go over to the next one. Are you guys ready? 3, 2, 1, here we go. There was a time when superhero stories were generic, most still are, but this plot is what I would call the perfect balance between all walks of a real and imaginary life. It isn't all fantastic boss fights and over-the-top dialogues. There is so much humane stuff, which is exactly why we got to see Spidey being Peter, the no superpower nerd with all the problems and charms of a regular millennial here. And besides, Spider or otherwise, he's still a man or a mortal. We see a mature and seasoned crime-fighting Spidey in this iteration, who has already won the trust of New Yorkers and is a full-time superhero and part-time scientist, working with none other than Dr. Octavius, who is a respected scientist himself at Octavius Industries. The plot starts off solidly with the police Captain Yuri, who's actually a woman, and just to be clear, it's the name that perplexed me, not the designation, who asks Spidey for help since NYPD is about to arrest Wilson Fisk. And soon after they do, a lot of people pop up in the city to take over Kingpin's turf. So Spidey works with Captain Yuri to contain the crime. He also helps out his Aunt May from time to time at a place of work, food, emergency aid, shelter and training, or the Feast Center, which is funded by none other than Martin Lee, who isn't revealed to be a villain yet. I loved Lee's early on portrayal where he's a kind, loving man who genuinely wants to help others. It gave him much needed depth and polarity, because after witnessing his good side, it's difficult to outright hate the man or call him a full-blown baddie. But a new threat is on the horizon as Asian dudes with what seems like superpowers start showing up and wreaking havoc in the city. Enter Mary Jane, the daredevil journalist who infiltrates an art gallery primarily owned by Wilson Fisk to uncover a story, but finds out that something more sinister than black market dealing and money laundering is at play. We even get to play as MJ a few times, which gives us a great idea what taking risk and not having superpowers feels like. She's caught snooping around the gallery by the demons. That's what they call Martin Lee thugs. And right at the nick of time, Spidey saves the day. But they never give it a damsel in distress feel. Rather, it's one friend helping out another scenario. It is later established that Peter and MJ are not together officially anymore. And it's during this time we get a beautiful posthumous cameo appearance by the GOAT, Stan Lee. Don't make me cry, guys. After that, Peter meets Martin Lee to ask about the mask he took off of a demon, as Lee has a degree in art history. Martin plays oblivious, but still gives Peter a subtle friendly warning, which he masks as a caution. It's back to more crime fighting as Shocker, another villain I had no idea existed, shows up and is trying to rob a bank. Spider-Man takes him on and defeats him, obviously, but begins to suspect that he's working with the demons and trying to take over Wilson Fisk's empire and territory. These occasions firmly establish that Spider-Man is a formidable force at this point, and it would take a real or a meager level threat to actually ruffle his feathers. Meanwhile, Doc Ock, who thinks Peter is working for Spider-Man, is hit with a legal notice by Norman Osborn, who's his former partner in business, but intends to shut his work down to essentially take out the competition. This story gave dimensions to Osborn and Octavius. It showed us that Doc Ock isn't a content and righteous man, but a deeply envious and hateful person, with a myriad of regrets from his past, which justified his eventual change in personality perfectly. Spider-Man 2's Doc Ock was a very good man turned absolute villain by a chip, which might have seemed good enough back then, but here it makes more sense, as his mechanical tentacles and neural interface AI only amplifies his darkest personality traits. Osborn 2, despite not being an outright villain here, is the root of most problems, as he was and still is the reason why many people's lives are destroyed, hence being a catalyst for the events that occur. Spider-Man then heads to a Fisk-operated shipyard, which is one of the few locations that haven't been hit by the demons that night. And after he takes out Fisk's armed thugs, he catches up with Officer Jefferson Davis to snoop around, or legally searches the place rather. There they find that Fisk was secretly housing a ton of high-tech weapons. Of course he was. Well, what did you expect? Some hidden baby bottles. And they also find out the demons are in the process of clearing out the majority of his stash, but Officer Davis and Spidey work together to stop them. We then find out that Peter is evicted from his apartment for not paying the rent. And this scene gave his character a lot of layers for two reasons. One, despite having superpowers, he doesn't lose his temper or anything. I mean, he literally could have spent the night there, but he doesn't, which shows us that he respects the law that he's trying to uphold. And two, he does seem a bit upset, understandably, but doesn't lose his spirit. It told me that this is a good man above all else. He then does what a freshly evicted 23-year-old would do and tries to get in with his ex. But since she's busy with work, he crashes at the V Center in Aunt May's office. But just before that, he finds out that Black Cat's in town. The next morning, he wakes up to find that Aunt May has arranged money for his rent. See? Character development. What a beautiful concept. He's told by MJ, who wrote the article about Officer Davis and Spider-Man's heroics the previous night, that Davis is being honored at City Hall by the mayor Norman Osborn and asks if he could show up. He gladly says yes, but then gets a call from Davis himself, who asks Spidey to check out a Fisk-controlled site as there was some demon activity in the place. He gets there only to find out the demons are killing off Fisk's men, and suspecting that Fisk has knowledge about who controls the demons, Spidey agrees to save his men in exchange for information. This is where we got a crazy sequence where we see Spider-Man chasing a helicopter while it wreaks havoc all across Manhattan, and when he does catch up, it disables the rotors mid-air and then webs up the giant object between two skyscrapers. It's right out of a high-budget A-list Hollywood movie, and at this point we are introduced to another principal character, Miles Morales. That's right, the other Spider-Man, who happens to be the son of Officer Davis. Peter then heads heads to City Hall to attend the award ceremony, but as himself and not Spider-Man. And during the formalities, Osborn gets a threat call, telling him that in the coming days, his reign will end, along with his life, and at that moment, demon thugs detonate multiple bombs at the place, knocking Peter out cold, while other demons show up with weapons massacring ordinary citizens. This is where we get to play as Miles Morales before he got any powers, who's looking for his father through the rubble but finds out that he was right next to a bomb when it exploded, and in an attempt to save others, he sacrificed his life. This was an extremely emotional and powerful scene as it sets up the perfect base for the game Spider-Man Miles Morales. There's a funeral where we see a devastated Miles and a worried Peter who spotted Lee at the massacre and deduces that he is the demon head, or their leader. Yeah. He tells MJ of his theory and she gives him the location of a recycling center that Martin owns, where he finds a ton of demon thugs protecting the place. And after he takes care of them and infiltrates the office, he finds loads of Fisk weapons there, while also finding evidence of upcoming attacks and his theory about Lee. And here he also learns of something called the Devil's Breath. He tells Yuri all he knows and heads over to the demon's next target location, which is crawling with demon thugs. And while he's getting his morning exercise via some vigilante ass-kicking, the woman that had my web shooter electrified shows up, Silver Sable, along with a battalion of highly trained soldiers who are there to take the demons down at the orders of Mayor Osborn, who's paid for the private military out of his own pocket. Sable is introduced as an adversary to Spidey, but since the bug has a serious hard-on for this silver-haired femme fatale, he uses all his wit and eventually gets on her good side. Well, the other good side, Yuri interjects before Sable and her army end up killing Spidey and asks them to work together. He then gets back to the feast center to see if he can find any clues connecting Lee to the demons. And while investigating, Peter comes across many strange things, but one particular item stood out, which made Lee a terrifically written villain, his letter to May, apologizing to her and asking her to take care of herself. Multi-dimensional villains have always been my favorite. I do enjoy some black and white shaded characters from time to time, but the most intriguing will always be the bad guys, who are not always bad. Lee is portrayed as a good man who genuinely cares about his fellow people, but also has some serious issues. So at no point will you be able to outright hate the man. If anything, you'll empathize with him and some of his actions. And while leaving the office, he finds Lee standing there waiting for him. But before he could confront Lee, Aunt May comes along. So they play friends and Lee once again warns Peter in a subtle way. And after putting in some scientist work with Doc Ock, Peter gets to MJ's apartment. Oh no, that's not what they do, guys. They talk, come on. MJ tells him she went to investigate a place and found that Tombstone was back in play. If you don't know who that is, I'm right with you. He's basically a crime big wheel with indestructible skin who becomes the main boss in a side mission. So a side boss, I guess. And when the two are talking, Spider-Man receives an alert via a police network that he's hacked into, which happens to be into an Oscorp CFO's house. His Spidey senses tell him there's demon involvement, so he rushes there to find out that he was right. And after some combat and stealth, he saves Charles Standish, the CFO, and learns that the Devil's Breath is a top secret Oscorp funded project that's been going on for years. And a Dr. Isaac Delaney is one of the people on payroll. And while trailing him, Spidey reaches the Empire State University to find out there's a Halloween party going on. He tracks down Delaney but is too late as Martin Lee has beat him to it, and it's revealed that Lee has the power to corrupt anybody and bring out their negative side with his touch, hence the moniker Mr. Negative. He makes Delaney shoot himself only after extracting the name of the research head for Devil's Breath, Dr. Morgan Michaels. And to lose Spidey, he corrupts a bunch of people at the party who start beating up others. Spidey stops them and decides to infiltrate Norman Osborn's office, which is now secured by Sable International, as that would be the only place where he can get all the answers. And after hacking into Oscorp's servers, Spidey creeps into Osborn's office to discover that the Devil's Breath, officially called GR27, is actually a genome editing method designed to cure genetic disorders, but the viral delivery system has become hostile, targeting the immune system and killing off the host before curing them. And the only sample in existence is kept on Dr. Michaels' person at all times. So while looking for answers, both MJ and Spidey reach a Sable's stronghold where Charles Standish is being held. But in order to protect MJ, Spidey abandons the mission and pulls her out, much to her chagrin. These instances put MJ on the map as an equal, as someone who isn't afraid to kick the hornet's nest for answers. And this is apparently also why they broke up in the first place, as Spider-Man had treated her as a damsel in distress in the past. In the meantime, we get a follow-up on Miles, who started working with the Feast and Aunt May in order to better his mental state and avoid therapy. We see shades of a budding hero in him, as he stands up to what's wrong and fights back muggers despite having no powers. Spidey saves him from a beatdown and also teaches him a few tricks. This game also serves as the perfect superhero origin story for Miles Morales, so it's way more than a Peter Parker adventure, as the stories of all characters within the universe are advanced with each passing sequence. Meanwhile, Lee tracks down Dr. Michaels and kidnaps him, but Spidey manages to get there and puts a dent in his plans, also earning the trust of Dr. Michaels in the process, who then reveals to him that Lee intends to release the Devil's Breath at transit hubs in order to cause maximum damage and spread the virus quickly. MJ and Spidey deduce the location of the attack to be Grand Central Station, but she beats him to the punch and gets there first, where they finally work together to save the hostages and thwart Lee's plan. We see a great boss fight here with shades of Spider-Man 2's train sequence, and after some adrenaline pumping back and forth, Spidey stops Lee and apprehends him. Meanwhile, Dr. Octavius, who has a neuromuscular degenerative disorder, is getting more and more unstable mentally due to his continuous experiments with the neural interfaces. But by the time Lee is apprehended, Doc Ock perfects his mechanical tentacles or arms, which he thinks will help him live the rest of his life without his body functioning. The Devil's Breath along with Lee are being transported to Raft Prison, the Supermax facility right outside of Manhattan, but Lee's transit vehicle is attacked, freeing the man with the Devil's Breath in his possession. And at the same time, someone has organized a mass breakout at Rikers Heights, the local prison, but Spidey gets there to work with the cops and contain the situation. But Rikers isn't the only one that's hit, as Raft is under attack too, and major threats like Electro, Vulture, and Scorpion are on the loose. Spider-Man reaches Raft, and after some back and forth with some underlings, a huge multi-villain boss fight takes place, at the end of which Spider-Man is down and Doc Ock is revealed as the mastermind behind all these attacks, as he wanted to smear Osborn's name and tarnish his legacy by releasing the Devil's Breath, the accidental weapon that Osborn's company developed to show the people how he's a fiend and a monster. He does just that and infects a majority of the people in New York, including Aunt May. When Spider-Man was almost killed, I honestly thought this was the end of the game and assumed that while he was recovering from his injuries, Miles would take over somehow and the conclusion would come in the sequel, but to my pleasant surprise, the story went right on. Yuri saves Spider-Man from drowning as he's unconscious in the water after the beating he received, but the city is overrun with criminals. We see an almost dystopian version of New York here, with prisoners running rampart all over the place and destroying everything in their path. A nearly broken Spidey is trying to contain the situation as best as he can, but the veteran center is attacked and set on fire by escapees while MJ, Aunt May, and Miles are there, trying to get people to safety. Peter arrives and rescues May from the fire, but is almost about to fall into the burning building, at which time MJ and Miles save him. This was an extraordinary sequence as it shed light on how a person can be a hero without any superpowers, and also why MJ is the girl. Amazing stuff. Spider-Man manages to pick up the trail of the virus, which leads him to Doc Ock's base of operations, where all things finally made sense. With a few tapes and items such as maps and gadgets, they tie together the whole story and suddenly everything falls into place. How and when did the Doc turn? What his darkest thoughts were? How he recruited other villains into his grand plan? Pretty much all things. But oh, the place is rigged to explode. Although Spidey is able to escape, some Sable agents go rogue and try to take advantage of the ensuing chaos, as Sable International has now been given unlimited authority and jurisdiction in New York and are also hunting for Spider-Man. And after this, the most entertaining and action-packed part of the game kicks off, as we get to see not one, not two, but about 4 major boss battles with 6 different villains, almost in succession. First it's Vulture and Electro teaming up to take out Spider Man, but after a terrific sequence, he defeats them. Then it's Spidey versus Scorpion, where he's injected with the poison so he starts hallucinating. And even here we get glimpses of Doc Ock, which tells us how much Peter appreciated and looked up to Dr. Octavius as a scientist and as a person. Even while all this action is going on, they somehow make time and squeeze in a terrific bit of story and character development for Miles, who tries to go out of the feast center and get medication for Aunt May, whose condition is worsening. This is where he encounters Rhino at a shipping yard, but Spidey interjects and saves him, and the second boss battle of this sequence begins. Scorpion also joins the fight in an attempt to take out Spidey, but the web slinger overcomes the odds and beats them both. Meanwhile, MJ infiltrates Osborn's residence and finds that Harry, who subtly referenced all throughout the game, has a genetic disorder which killed his mother and is now slowly taking his life, and GR27 was Norman's attempt to save his only son. But while she's snooping around, Sable agents get there, and when they are just about to corner and capture her, she jumps off the building, but Spidey saves her. Even this segment has so much logic and dense information influx, as it not only sheds light on why Norman developed GR27 in the first place, but also tells us what Martin Lee's take is in bringing down Osborn, who along with Octavius first experimented the formula on Martin Lee years ago, which unfortunately caused him to have an adverse reaction and get superpowers, but he accidentally ended up killing his own parents. Hence the hate against Osborn, who went against Octavius's repeated warnings and conducted clinical experiments on a young Lee. This scene also sets into the motion the events that makes Miles Morales a Spider-Man, as a genetically modified spider jumps onto MJ's jacket while she's in Osborn's secret lair. And after this, Spider-Man goes to the biotech facility where GR27 was developed in hopes of getting an antidote to cure the infected New Yorkers. Upon reaching the place, he sees that Lee and Octavius are already there and are about to kill Osborn, but at the nick of time, Silver Sable gets there and joins hands with Spidey. And while Sable holds back demon thugs, Spider-Man pursues Lee and a huge boss fight ensues, but somehow he finds a way to get through to him, as Peter believes in the good in Lee and manages to stop him. But Doc Ock suddenly arrives and snatches the antidote from Spider-Man, kidnaps Osborn and almost kills Spidey. He's rescued by Sable, but when he sees that Aunt May is nearing death with every passing moment, he decides to go fight Doc Ock even in his weakened state. I love that they haven't tried to reduce cutscene lengths whatsoever. So there's a whole Spider-Man movie perfectly fit amidst the game. He dons a new suit which replenishes his gadgets instantly, and the final boss battle begins. The culmination of nearly 3 decades of story which began way back when Osborn and Octavius were in college together. When he gets to Oscorp Tower and rescues Osborn from falling to his death, Doc Ock reveals that he knew Peter was Spider-Man all along, but decided to play possum to avoid suspicion. And then ensues what could be the most emotional boss fight I have ever seen, because we see the conniving and evil side of Doc and the heroic side of Peter more than ever, and the dialogues are just brilliant. Peter's disappointment in the Doc, his heartache at seeing a man who was a mentor and sort of a father figure turn into this monster, his desperation for the cure as Aunt May is on her deathbed, his outright anger on Doc's deception, and Octavius's villainous side shining through, with him trying to outright murder Peter and even going solo as to try and deceive him again by not just blaming the neural interface for all he's done, but trying to blackmail Peter by subtly threatening him that he'll reveal Spider-Man's real identity unless he lets him escape, to which Peter responds with the most noble and heroic reply. What a breathtaking sequence. The battle itself isn't the best, but when we take the overall episode into account, this arguably could be the best of all time. And after defeating him and rendering his mechanical arms useless, Peter rushes back to the feast center where May reveals that she knew he was Spider-Man from quite some time and is proud of him. But Dr. Michaels reveals that she only has a few hours to live, and Spidey has to choose between saving Aunt May, who very well could mean as much as a mother to him, or give away the only dose of the antidote for mass production, which will take days. When we talk games making people cry, this is exactly it. We see Peter wanting to save May so bad, he almost injects her with the antidote. but he somehow musters the strength to walk away and let her die so that thousands may live. Talk about building a story to the most touching and heartbreaking yet heroic climax. In the aftermath, the antidote is mass-produced and distributed to New Yorkers. Doc Ock is arrested but is more hateful than ever, and Peter and MJ get back together. Meanwhile, the spider on MJ's jacket bites Miles, and he gets the powers of Spider-Man and surprises Peter with his new abilities. But Peter has a surprise of his own. We also get a glimpse of Harry in suspended animation and a distraught Norman who vows to find the cure to Harry's condition, which lays the perfect backdrop for an eventual Green Goblin appearance with shades of Venom as well. The complexity and multitude of perspectives it brings to the table is what made this one of the best, if not the best, superhero game plots of all time. Right from the get-go, they hook you in with Spider-Man's infectious personality and build a layered and realistic world that compels you to keep living the fantasy even after the main story and all the activities are over with. All the characters involved have received tremendous care and impeccable writing, which makes you feel ever so invested in the happenings of the Spidey world and the people around him. Like when he's rushing to save someone, you can feel the urgency because you begin to care about their well-being. And the main story itself is one that satisfies you without any major cliffhangers. Somehow the writers have managed to leave no loose ends, and yet the quality itself is so extraordinarily high. I just can't wait for Spider-Man 2. And then there's the DLC part, which I'd be covering in an entirely separate video, as it's a massive and fulfilling story in its own right. Also, the rock-solid tonal consistency throughout the game is something that I appreciated, as more often than not, we see games where the theme is all over the place. The most impressive thing about the game is that the bulk of the missions are bloody different, in the sense that even in the same set of main or side objectives, there's abundant variety. Let's talk about the side missions first, because most games have a certain blueprint that they follow. Like you have to search for the same kind of artifact or identical activities take place, like defeating enemies or recovering merchandise, etc., but in different locations. And when a few of those are combined, one side mission is formed. But here the structure of each individual mission is unique, and they are all formed in a way where you're compelled to go through them, as they are not only tremendously fun, but give you a lot of background info on Spider-Man and his world. There are also rewards at the end of side missions called tokens, which are essential in unlocking upgrades. For example, there are 17 research stations across Manhattan that are owned by Oscorp, which monitor different aspects of the city like air quality, sewage, and water pressure, all of which are essential pieces of New York. And the stations are apparently pet projects of Harry's mom. But Oscorp is about to cut the funding to them, and Spidey, at the request of Harry, proves their worth to Oscorp so that they continue to run them. And every station has a totally unique mission. Apart from the aforementioned Tombstone side mission, there's a plethora of diverse missions that include helping the common folk of New York, like saving a woman's husband, putting a stop to Fisk's plans by beating up his men, and the Fuseball missions, which I gotta say were the funniest because of a social media and fame-obsessed teenager persona. Even with enemy bases, some places have tougher bad guys, some have more environmental takedown options, and in others there'll be a large number of opponents to challenge Spider-Man. There are other smaller missions where you have to activate police scanners at the request of Captain Yuri Watanabe, find Peter's old backpack scattered across the city, which have all kinds of Easter eggs about his past, his life before and after he got superpowers, and references to other characters in the universe such as Uncle Ben, Sandman, Lizard, and even Mysterio. There's also the bloody difficult Taskmaster missions, which are filled with challenges in all areas of gameplay, traversal, combat, and stealth. Other small missions include sort of puzzles like fixing circuit boards and detecting materials involved in a project, which shed light on Peter's scientist life, but I can't speak much on it as science is not my forte. However, it's a good bit of fun and a nice change of pace. There's also a number of warehouses and outposts that belong to different bosses, where there's about 100 to 150 enemies in each location, all of whom are ready to have their asses handed to them by Spidey. One particular mission I loved was Peter having to take photos of important landmarks across New York, which didn't seem like much in the beginning, but then I realized the true purpose of the task, taking us to and showing us locations that would otherwise not be noticeable, like the Wakandan Embassy or Doctor Strange's Bleecker Street Sanctum. There are some Black Cat missions too, which is all about spotting some toy cats from a distance. I didn't think much of it initially, but it later culminates into a full-blown story in the DLC. And to give the city a real real life feel there are crimes going on around Spider-Man all the time. It's mostly random mugging, robbery attempts, and reckless driving on the criminal's part, but they do have an added layer of sub-objectives that you have to crack in order to get 100% completion status. And now about the main missions, which are filled to the brim with adrenaline-pumping boss fights, some great stealth scenarios, and a plethora of excellently written dialogues that further the storylines, give us answers, and are often fun and hilarious. And each boss fight has a purpose. Nothing feels out of place or forced. They give you enough motive through the storylines to really kick some ass in these big battles. This must be the quintessential Spidey music because it flows so well with the world and situations at hand. John Paisano has created a masterfully crafted album which might not intrigue you to go listen to it outside the game, but within it doesn't get better. Whether you're in a major fight sequence, having some beta time, or just swinging by among the skyscrapers in New York, the music always keeps you company and gives you a feeling of actually being Spider-Man. They've also captured the emotional essence of being Spidey perfectly with these tracks. Because when there's an emotional arc going on, the background music is paramount. If it doesn't connect with the scenario, it takes away greatly from the impact a situation would otherwise have. I think the music part is the most underrated aspect of the gaming industry. There have been some terrific albums like Assassin's Creed 2's BGM by Jesper Kyd, Nick Carindle's jaw-dropping Arkham Trilogy OST, and even some of Spider-Man 2018's tracks can be added to the list of all-time greats for that matter. Sometimes people are just looking for a good time with some action in a game, and others want a game to immerse and deeply involve them into the world it has built around itself. But Spider-Man 2018 has the ability to do both. It's rare that any modicum of entertainment could pull that off, and I called it the greatest superhero game ever because of this quality primarily. No matter your preference, this game has it all covered. You might not care for the story or skip all the cutscenes to get to a fight, but the fight itself will satisfy you immensely and would make you want to go back. I feel games should always entail replay value. If you play a game once but shudder at the thought of another playthrough, that tells me they have gone into overkill mode. Assassin's Creed Valhalla primarily comes to mind when I said that, because it's tremendously fun the first time and I might go back for the story, but when I think about the thousands of locations I need to crack to complete the game 100%, I start dreading the long, arduous process. And yes, I'm a reach 100% or go home kind of guy, as half-baked experiences often leave you with misconceptions or mixed feelings. And since I enjoy breaking down the games in depth, it's only fair I cover all areas of a playthrough and then come to conclusions. Because sometimes a few side missions or important Easter eggs make all the difference in the world building and the overall landscape of the game. If you have thoughts of buying it, please do. It's worth every last bit of the $60 they're demanding for it. Think about it, to convince a lifelong Arkham fan like me that a franchise I'm not even interested in has produced the best superhero game ever is a monumental task. Because Arkham has a totally different tone and feel, but the developers have cracked the task with flying colors. I'm not saying convincing me was important, but the fact that they were able to, and it's the same with anyone who gives it an open-minded and thorough shot, is the game's greatest achievement. If you need incentive to play the game, all you gotta do is go through the first 60 minutes and you won't turn back. And for those who ask why, just watch the fucking video. Because as always, I've tried my best to tell you exactly why. By the way, I'll be covering the DLC portion of the game comprehensively very soon. And since I also intend to complete another playthrough, my third in fact, just for good measure, I'll be adding any left out thoughts there. These are just my honest thoughts about the game. You might or might not concur with all my points, but I'd love to hear what you did and did not agree with. Also, if you've already played the game, I'd like to know your observations or facets I might have missed. So come down to the comments section so we can have a chat. That's it for today, guys. Stay safe, stay strong, and stay tuned. It's your boy VZX signing out.